Meanwhile, an inquest is underway today in Sudbury looking into a 5-year-old fatal boat crash that took place on Lake Wanapitei.
But it could have implications across the province for 911 dispatch and for emergency responders. CTV's Matt Ingram was at the inquiry and has the latest for us.
Marina Brendan, the lone survivor of the boating tragedy, held back tears as he described the moments after the crash. The inquest heard Rob Dorzek's 911 calls as he tried to get help.
Really horrible situation, scary situation, and at times you do hear Mr. Kritz in the background, and frankly, it's really just the trauma that you can almost hear Mr. Dorzek experiencing.
Stephanie Bertrand, Matthew Humanick, and Michael Kritz died when the boat they were on crashed into an island on Lake Wanapitei on June 30th, 2013. Dorzek had difficulties connecting with 911, and it took a long time for first responders to arrive, partly because 911 operators had trouble locating him. The inquest is looking into their deaths as well as the death of a fourth person in an unrelated incident to see if improvements can be made to the 911 system. Kritz's sister hopes the inquest will prevent future deaths.
We're hoping that by being here today, we're helping the jury to make some good recommendations about how to improve the 911 system.
The inquest will continue for the rest of the week here in Sudbury before moving on to Ottawa next week. In Ottawa, the inquest will consider the death of a woman in a separate incident in 2014. Matt Ingram, CTV News, Sudbury.
Well, a coroner's inquest continues into a fatal boat crash in the Sudbury area back in 2013. The only survivor of that deadly crash on Lake Wanapitei was back telling more of his story today about communications issues between himself and the 911 dispatch people. With more, here's CTV's Molly Frommer.
On day 2 of the inquest, 2 different people were called to the witness stand. One was lone survivor of the crash, Rob Dorzek, who lost 3 friends that day. He continued to talk about the communication problems he had with the 911 people. Also testifying was a call taker with the Central Ambulance Communications Center, who said from the time of the call at 12:30 a.m. till 1:30 a.m. things were chaotic as they tried to pinpoint where the crashed boat and the people were.
It's not easy reliving these experiences, and you can tell from the witnesses today how difficult it was. And in the case of the person who was the call taker, the supervisor, did her best and trying to do her best, and you can sense the frustration that she felt she didn't have the resources needed to do the job that she would have expected.
Once again, testimony was emotional for all involved, including lone survivor Rob Dorzek, who said, quote, "I'll bleed out before I call 911 again." Molly Frommer, CTV News, Sudbury.
There was more testimony today at a coroner's inquest into a fatal boat crash in June of 2013 in Sudbury's Lake Wanapitei that killed 3 people. Today, a police dispatcher with Greater Sudbury Police and Fire talked more about the gap in response time in the incident that killed Matthew Humanick, Michael Kritz, and Stephanie Bertrand. The dispatcher said a 5th call was received at 1:10 a.m. from survivor Rob Dorzek. He had been told to light a signal fire to help responders locate him. She said there had been 5 calls in all in a 27-minute span.
It's day 4 of this coroner's inquest, tasked with looking at ways to improve Ontario's 911 emergency response system. Witnesses from the city's fire service say there was a breakdown in communication between them, other first responders, and 911 operators.
We've talked about sharing information between services. One thing we've learned is that they have different systems and they're not necessarily compatible. It really should be a caller-centric system as opposed to individual service situation.
Stephanie Bertrand, Matthew Humanick, and Michael Kritz died when the boat they were on crashed into an island on Lake Wanapitei on June 30th, 2013. Lone survivor Rob Dorzek had to call 911 5 times because his calls kept getting dropped. It took more than an hour after the first call before rescue arrived, partly because 911 operators had difficulty locating him. But volunteer firefighters Mark Bardswich and James McDowell testified that if a map of the accident location sent to 911 by Dorzek had been shared with them, they would have known immediately how to get there.
If in this case that map, as you noted, was shared with any number of people who were familiar with the area, they would have known exactly where Mr. Dorzek was within Not even minutes, seconds probably.
Sudbury Fire Captain Terrence LaRocque testified if he had better understood the urgency of the situation, he would have told the rescue boat to leave immediately instead of waiting for paramedics.
Fire had been told earlier they'd be there 13 minutes earlier. If they were aware of the fire 10 minutes earlier, they would have left earlier. Every minute counts because, as we learned, they're only about 6 minutes away.
The inquiry wraps up in Sudbury on Friday before heading to Ottawa to consider another death. The jury is expected to release recommendations for improving the province's 911 system by the end of the month. Matt Ingram, CTV News, Sudbury.